Guys, today I will rank forcers based on how much they rely on constellations. You can pretty much consider this a polling guide where each tier represents a possible stopping point for constellations on a 4-star. So let's go. First character Xiangling, we're starting with a bang. All around pretty good constellations. The constellation 1 allows Gorou to inflict pyro resistance reduction on the opponents he hits with the flames, which is pretty good in general, but since the hits are single target, it's not that consistent. The big constellations are definitely the one that impact the burst. Specifically, the Constellation 4 is the most important one because it extends the duration of the Pyronado by 5 seconds, and the Constellation 6 is also very nice because it increases pyro damage for basically the whole team. Chevreuse, the most recent Pyro and Electro buffer. Honestly, she's pretty great at Constellation 0 already because her supportive kit is already pretty loaded at that Constellation level, but the Constellation 6 is without a doubt very strong. It just pushes her supportive capabilities to a point where she can overcome even the anemo units like Heizou on such teams, so it's very good. Just not a must, it's not a must for her for sure, because at Constellation 0, she's already very strong, and she also has other constellations like the Constellation 1, Constellation 4 that make her a tiny bit better. Let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really helps me notice your support. Mika, the infamous physical buffer. Just like Chevreuse, he has a Constellation 6 that is very strong because it gives a lot of crit damage, but I wouldn't say it's a must because it's usable at Constellation 0 for different stuff like the fact he's a healer and he also provides attack speed bonuses makes her useful in some Fiorina teams, and also is not totally bad without a Constellation 6 on physical teams either. So it's very good, but I just wouldn't say it's a must to make him a character. Heizou, an emo DPS through the Elemental skill. He has pretty nice constellations, the Constellation 6 is the best, but it doesn't increase his damage by a lot, it's just nice. The Constellation 3 is good, but in general, from all of these constellations, it doesn't get a very big increase. It's nice, just not a very big increase. It gets nice upgrades. Dori. Dori is an electro healer that gains energy recharge supportive capabilities at Constellation 4, and these gave a niche use on Eula teams that wasn't really great at release, but the Constellation 6 allows her to get Electro Infusion and also allows her to heal the whole team through normal attacks, and this gives her a great use on Fiorina teams, the Fiorina Quick Bloom teams, where she can carry and she feels nice. And so since her Constellation 0 role isn't the best, I'm not a fan, but the Constellation 6 is something I really like, I'm leaning on putting her here, because I think carrying with the Constellation 6 is her main use. Yunjin, the normal attack support. She fits great with characters like Yumiya and Wanderer. I wouldn't say she's the clear best in slot for either of them, but she's fine, I guess. And the constellations are mostly nice upgrades, she doesn't have the Constellation 6 upsides these characters have, because she just increases normal attack speed through that. And overall, she provides nice upgrades to the carries through those constellations, but not amazing, I guess. Chongyun. He has a pretty unique constellation, the Constellation 2, that decreases the elemental skill and burst cooldown of bursts and skills that get casted within his elemental skill circle, so that's pretty unique. But personally, I consider him to be more of a burst DPS that can melt his elemental bursts for pretty nice damage. At Constellation 0, it's not that great. The Constellation 6 single-handedly makes this interesting, so I will put him in the highest tier. Kuki. To me, Constellation 2 is a pretty good stopping point on her because the Constellation 2 specifically increases the duration of her elemental skill that is great for uptime on Hyperbloom teams. The Constellation 4 is also pretty nice because it increases her application, but is not a must, I guess. The Constellation 2 is very good and a good stopping point. Yanfei, a Pyro main DPS. Her constellations don't increase her upside for the main DPS role by a lot, overall they're around a 13% damage increase, which is pretty much on the low end. The Constellation 4 adds an alternative role for her of a shielder that is pretty good actually, but it's just an alternative thing, it's not a must for her main role, so I'm more leaning on putting her here. Kirara. She has great Constellation 4 and 6, the Constellation 4 increases her application by a lot, the Constellation 6 provides a pretty much team-wide damage bonus, so it's pretty nice. So yeah. here. Thoma, the Pyro Shielder. The constellation I like the most for him is the Constellation 4 that pretty much decreases his energy requirements by quite a bit, which is great for a character that has an 80 cost elemental burst. For the rest, the Constellation 6 he has is also pretty good because it increases the normal and charge attack damage for active characters, so it's good for characters like Hu Tao, Wanderer. Just not really generally great, it's nice to have if you need it on the team, otherwise it's whatever. The Constellation 4 is definitely the stopping point to me. Candance. Candance doesn't really have a defined role in the game, she can infuse Hydro for the active character, but she's not great at it, she's not a great presence on the team. The Constellation 6 gives her utility by increasing her application, which is great on Bloom teams, and it's good enough for me to put her here, honestly. I just don't think she has a good role without it, while with it, at least she has a niche where she can be decent, I guess. Kaeya. Yes, pretty nice constellations. The Constellation 2 increases the duration of the elemental burst if you defeat opponents while it's active, which can potentially be a very big damage increase, but the Constellation 6 is definitely the one. It's a big damage increase because it adds an extra icicle to his elemental burst, and it also provides a very good energy refund, and not only that, it also increases his cryo application, which makes him very good at enabling melts. It's just an absurd constellation, honestly, and it's a shame since you can't easily pull Kaeya, so there is that, but yeah, it's very good. Charlotte, mostly just a cryo healer, and the constellations mostly just increase that as well, excluding the Constellation 4, that to me is the biggest one. She has a 80 energy cost burst, and the Constellation 4 decreases the energy requirements for her by a lot, which is great because you can be more flexible with artifacts, with weapons, so it's just great utility to have on this character. Sara. Sara, to me, is a character that needs the Constellation 6 to be good. Constellation 6 that provides a 60% crit damage bonus for electro characters that are affected by her buffs, and without that, she's mostly just an attack buffer that is fine, just not great. Noelle. Geo carry that can heal the whole team by using normal and charge attacks, which makes her a great fit with Fiorina. She can definitely be good, but she just owes most of her potential to the Constellation 6, which is absurd, so without it she's not great as a carry, and she goes here. Gaming. The most recent 4-star DPS. He's pretty good at Constellation 0, his damage can be pretty impressive. The Constellation 6 is definitely very good and the best constellation he has, although the Constellation 4 that decreases his energy requirements is also nice. He's fine at Constellation 0, honestly, he's pretty decent, so I wouldn't put him here for sure. He has an incredible Constellation 6, but not a must, by definition. Fischl, Electro sub DPS. She is definitely decent at Constellation 0, she doesn't need the constellations, but they help a lot. Constellation 6 is the biggest one for sure, because it extends the duration of odds by 2 seconds, so in rotations where you use him twice like Quicken, but by using the burst and skill, it extends the total duration of odds by 4 seconds, which is very good. And on top of that, it makes odds able to fire coordinated attacks, so it adds a lot of damage overall, which is great for such a good sub DPS that deals a lot of damage on Quicken teams, just not a must, I guess, because she is still decent otherwise. Aimbear, pretty interesting case, because technically her main role is to be a main DPS, but she's been used as a sub DPS in the past on teams like Hu Tao, where her main role was to hold the energy of the end, that's the main thing. But her kit is definitely focused on making her do damage, and with the Constellation 2 and 4, she can actually do quite decently. The Constellation 2 makes her able to manually make the Baron Bunny, her elemental skill, explode by hitting it with an aimed shot, and that can actually translate to a lot of damage, especially with the Constellation 4 that makes her able to use the elemental skill more often during the rotation, so it can even double or triple her base damage, so it's pretty great. Yeah, massive Constellation 4. Lisa. She has one very good constellation, the Constellation 4, that makes her elemental burst basically able to produce more hits than normal. It can make it produce up to 2 additional hits, but the interesting thing about it is that these additional hits can only be generated in multi-target situations. Basically, the way it works, a single target can only be hit by a single burst hit per proc, and not only that, the additional procs are random, like they're not set in stone, like they're just RNG, so that kinda sucks. It's a lot of additional damage on average in multi-target situations, so that's nice. Rosaria. Her best constellation is definitely the Constellation 2 that extends the duration of her burst by 4 seconds in total, so that's 2 more hits and a lot more damage. The Constellation 5 is also nice because it's the talent level increase for the burst, which is very important on reverse melt teams with Rosaria where you want to deal real damage with her. The Constellation 6 is also pretty nice because it reduces resistance to physical on opponents that get hit by her elemental skill, so she just has great constellations all around. Faruzan. I'm not even explaining this honestly, like this is overdone at this point. Constellation 6 is a must for main use. Xinyan. Her main use is debatable. She is a shielder, but is not very good at it. She's a physical DPS, and she is kinda relatively decent at it. And for that role, her constellations are a great increase all around. Like she gets around a 40% damage increase going from Constellation 0 to 6. Gorou. Just like Faruzan, Sara, Mika, his Constellation 6 increases crit damage for his main type on the team, so Geo damage, and that's pretty nice, like a 13% damage increase for Geo damage dealers, which is great. I just don't feel like he's as bad as Sara without Constellation 6, like if both don't have the Constellation 6, I just feel Gorou is better. It feels better to use, his buffs are more unique than Sara's, and also he gains some healing utility from the Constellation 4, which is not a lot, but can be nice if you use Itto without a shielder on team or without a second healer. So yeah, Sucrose. Sucrose has pretty nice constellations, but none of them is really must to use her. Like the constellation one is pretty good because it gives her elemental skill an extra charge, which makes her a pretty great battery and also reduces her energy requirements by quite a lot. The Constellation 6 gives her elemental burst the capability to buff the element it's infused with, so she's a mini Kazuha there, but it's not that big of an increase really. Honestly, yeah, the Constellation one to me that increases her battering is the main constellation to me in general, like it just makes her more versatile. So yeah, I'm putting her here. Diona, mainly a cryo shielder and healer with an 80 cost energy burst that feels better to use with the Constellation 1 that refunds 15 energy after using it. Constellation 2 increases her shield durability, which is pretty nice as well. And the Constellation 6 gives her elemental mastery support, which is nice, but it's also pretty niche, like it's not a staple in any team, it's just a niche thing to have. And for her main role, the Constellation 1 and 2 are fine, like are fine stopping points. Sayu, an emo healer that can also be played on field through the very popular Sayu role. Still, the healer thing is the main part for most, I feel like. And Constellation 0, her burst doesn't heal the active character if he's above 70% HP. The Constellation 1 fixes that, so that's great. Other than that, the rest of her constellations mostly focus on her on-field role, and actually they don't make it much better. On-field, she's mostly used as a reaction enabler through swirls, and she does that fine at Constellation 0, honestly, like she doesn't need constellations. So yeah, nice upgrades. Ningguang, once popular as an on-field carry, now mostly used as a burst DPS. Actually, she's pretty good in quick swap roles with Navia, like on Navia teams, where she mostly uses her burst and skill. And for that type of use, the Constellation 2 that allows her to use more skills than normal is very good. And the Constellation 6 that allows her to fire off a quick, fully buffed charge attack after the burst is also a pretty great damage increase. Bennett, the most popular 4-star buffer in the game. A Constellation 0, it actually can't buff characters' attack if their HPs are below 70%, which kinda sucks actually. The Constellation 1 fixes this and increases the attack buffs, so it's pretty much a must-have. And honestly, this is a pretty good stopping point. even though he has a pretty unique Constellation 6 that gives the active character Pyro Infusion, something that has become very popular with Xiangling now, thanks to Pyro Plunges, like the vape teams with Pyro Plunges. So in the case you have Xinyan, that can be a very good pull, but I feel like for 90% of his teams, it's not needed. Constellation 1 is a good stopping point. Lynette. Mostly an Anemo sub DPS with some taunting utility and some support. The Constellation 4 is pretty huge for her because it gives her elemental skill an extra charge, so that's a lot of extra energy. And for a character that has a 70 cost elemental burst, that's a lifesaver pretty much. Constellation 6 is actually pretty interesting as well because it gives her an Anemo infusion after using an elemental skill, so that pretty much makes her a carry. That is actually a playstyle that is not that bad with Faruzan Constellation 6 and now Xiangling with Plunges, but it's just niche, I guess. Her main use is sub DPS to me, and Constellation 4 is a good stopping point for that. Beidou, Electro sub DPS that deals most of her damage through her elemental burst that is pretty unique actually in the way it functions. Basically, the way it works, after hitting an opponent, if there is another opponent nearby, the hit will also bounce on him and then back to the original opponent, basically hitting 3 times. The Constellation 2 is pretty huge because it adds 2 extra bounces to this process, making it 5 in total, which is a lot of additional damage. And honestly, that's enough to make her a pretty nice sub DPS. The Constellation 5 and 6 are also pretty nice damage increases for burst and electro damage as well, but the Constellation 2 is huge enough to make her nice. Yao Yao, Dendro Healer. She has pretty good early constellations. The Constellation 1 gives the active character a Dendro damage bonus when she uses the elemental skill, that is pretty nice for characters like Alhaitham, Tinari, and the Constellation 2 is an energy refund that comes in handy for a character that has a 80 energy cost burst, so yeah. Constellation 6 adds some extra healing and application, but honestly not really needed. She has great early constellations. Razor, main role physical DPS. Ever used her? No, honestly, so that's pretty awkward. His constellations are honestly nice, the Constellation 4 gives his elemental skill the ability to apply more defense reduction on opponents. That is a nice team damage increase. Other than that, it's pretty standard, he has some damage increase, but honestly not that high. I guess nice upgrades. Barbara, Hydro Healer. Her constellations are not that great, but actually rather interesting, however. The Constellation 6 allows her to revive a character who dies in combat. That is quite unique, but just not that useful in practice in my experience. For the rest, the constellations pretty much just increase her healing utility, which is nice for a healer, but not really great. Layla. She has some nice constellations. The Constellation 2 increases the durability of her shield. The Constellation 4 adds some support to her kit by making the active character deal more normal charge attack damage every few seconds basically. And Constellation 6 increases her personal damage output by quite a bit. It's not the highest as a baseline, but it's nice, I guess. Overall, nice constellations. Xingqiu. His Constellation 2 is nice. It extends his burst duration by 3 seconds, and it also allows its attacks to reduce hydro resistance to the opponents that get hit by it, so it's a nice damage increase. His Constellation 6 is definitely the big one because it adds extra attacks to his elemental burst, which means more damage and more application. The extra application thing isn't really needed because even at Constellation 0, it has basically the highest hydro application in the game, so there is that. But the Constellation 6 makes it more consistent, I guess, which is nice for sure, and it also gives him an energy refund, which is great to have for a character whose burst costs 80 energy. Collei. She has pretty nice constellations. The Constellation 2 and 6 add more damage to her kit while also giving her more application, which is great on Bloom teams. It's nice on Quicken teams. Her damage is not the highest really, but it's nice. And the fact that she gets more application is really interesting. It opened very nice team opportunities for her on Bloom teams. So yeah, I would put her here. Lastly, Kave. pretty famous for being a weaker Nidou, since he can power up the normal blooms like Nidou can, just in a much weaker way, and he can also make them explode faster by himself through the elemental skill, which however has a 6 seconds cooldown. The Constellation 6 fixes this by basically adding a passive elemental skill effect every 3 seconds, but the thing is, these bloom themes that Kaeya enables are not that great, and normally is used on Nidou teams because he has self-healing capabilities which are great, and he can also buff bloom damage further, so he has a nice niche there, and for that niche only is Constellation 1 that increases the healing he can provide for himself, and the Constellation 4 are really nice. Some changes I will make, probably Xiangling lower, because I guess the Constellation 4 is a good stopping point. The Constellation 6 isn't really needed. Maybe Kirara lower as well, because her Constellation 6 is pretty similar to Xiangling's, and it's not really needed. Like the Constellation 4 can be a good stopping point. And alright, that's it. I'm pretty satisfied with this now.